Okay, so from my end, we're good to start. Just give me a thumbs up and I'd be good to start. Okay. All right, good morning, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you're joining us from. It's really early in the United Kingdom where I'm joining you guys from for today's webinar. It's going to be an exciting one. We have around 30 people, 31 people on the call, and then the live stream discussing a very important topic today via this webinar. And we have a stellar panel with us as well to discuss, deliberate, and engage on discussions surrounding businesses and human rights in Pakistan. What are the awareness, disclosure challenges, and regulatory landscape? How does it look like? We would be speaking about and discussing and deliberating that what are the way forwards as well on this particular area, and what is it that we can jointly do as business associates, as the regulators, as people who are setting the entire strategy and the policy for this particular area. Very important two aspects when we're speaking about human rights. How does it connect with the ESG framework and the governance frameworks that organizations are increasingly speaking about? I would suggest and request anybody who's joining us, kindly keep your microphones muted. If you have a question that you have to ask, then please use the raise hand function in the Teams that you can see, or the chat function, and we'd come around to you to ask questions. Without further ado, let me introduce our organizers for today. So our heartiest thanks on behalf of ESG Nexus to Transparency International, who have Pakistan, who have taken this joint collaborative initiative with us to create this particular webinar. It is going to be recorded. The recording would be available on the socials as well. So anybody who is here to achieve or claim their continuous professional development, their CPD claims, feel free to reach out to ESG Nexus and we'll be happy to support you with that. So introducing, this is in no particular order, but we're really glad that we have equal representation, starting off with Kashif Ali, who is the Executive Director, Transparency International Pakistan. Kashif Sahib, if you can say hi, hello, so that we know that you can hear us okay.
Hi, everyone.
Wonderful. So Kashif Saab is a budding policy analyst. He's a governance expert, and currently he has this executive director portfolio at Transparency International. Largely, his work is focused on increasing the demand and momentum for effective anti-corruption and social accountability reforms at the national level and among key anti-corruption stakeholders. So thank you so much, Kashif, for taking out the time and being here with us. Next up, we have Hola Batul, who is the Deputy Director, Ministry of Human Rights. Hola, how are you today as well? Just do a little sound check and say hello to the audience so we know that they can hear you.
Hello, glad to be here.
Wonderful. Hola is also coming in with 14 years of experience in the human rights domain, and she is working aggressively towards the implementation of the National Action Plan for businesses and human rights, something that we'll also be speaking about today, so our discussions can be focused on that as well. Next up, we have Fernanda Cabrera, who's a member UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. Thank you so much for joining us, Fernanda. If you can also say a little hello so that we know everybody can hear you okay.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Glad to be here.
Wonderful. And Fernanda is coming with 20 years of experience working in the human rights domain, working on economic and gender justice, and she has been focusing on also promoting corporate and financial accountability, a large part of which comes under the governance frameworks as well that we're going to discuss. So we're really looking forward for that. Thank you, Fernanda. Next up, we have Rabia Razak, who is a Senior Program Officer at ILO Country Office in Islamabad. Good to have you here, Rabia, as well. If you can also do a little sound check so we know that we can hear you.
Thank you very much. Happy to join. Thank you.
Wonderful. And Rabia is also coming in with 21 years of experience in the sustainable development, in the labor rights and social protection areas. And her work is largely contributed towards the human resource development network as well, which has been working largely on setting up the policies and frameworks in the country and globally as well. And finally, completing our panel is Usman Masood, who is the director at ESG Nexus. He's a familiar face in a lot of these webinars that we have been doing the last 2-ish years. So Usman, so good to have you here as well. A little sound check would be great.
Yes, thank you, Noor. Happy to be part of this webinar.
Wonderful. And Usman comes in with over 20 years of experience in the energy efficiency, change management, and sustainable business practices sector. This, ladies and gentlemen, completes our panel for today. I would try my level best that we keep it as engaging as possible, and it would be useful if the people who are joining us on the call, if you can use the chat function just for all of our panelists and attendees to get to know a little bit about yourself. So just use the chat function, please. Introduce who you are, what is your designation, and where are you working, so that we can develop our conversations on that. Wonderful. So we look forward to the chat and looking at the comments as well. All right, starting and setting the scene of this very important topic. We're talking about businesses, we're talking about human rights. There's a lot of international level discussions around how are we holding accountability and reform over the years, and what is it that we are doing in terms of ensuring that businesses and human rights are being aligned as well. So I'm going to start with Rabia, with you, and let me just start off in saying that Transparency International has been working a lot over the years in terms of corporate reporting. There's a latest assessment that has happened in Transparency in Corporate Reporting, the TRAC initiative, which suggests a lot of compliance levels. What are the gaps, and why do you believe that this framework is particularly important in Pakistan's current economic and governance scenario? Sorry, Kashif Saab, this question is essentially for you. I'm sorry. I can't see you, so there we go.
Sure. Sure. No, thank you. But let me answer this question by showing you some slides. So just to confirm, are the slides visible?
No, not but I'm sure that somebody would be able to pull it up really soon. If we can have the slides, there we go.
Okay, great. But just at the outset, on behalf of Transparency International Pakistan, also thank you very much for joining us today. And this is part of the conversation that we try to do with different stakeholders, both in person and virtually. And also, we're very happy to see a lot of companies that we have been engaging as part of this tool. So what I'm going to do to answer your question is to show you some numbers, because we are talking about essentially the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. And one of the, I think, the baselines that we have in the country at the moment is the assessment that the TI did last year. And this is, again, a flagship tool of Transparency International called Transparency in Corporate Reporting, which has been done in a lot of jurisdiction. In Pakistan, we have tried to sort of regularize this reporting every year by really looking at how the public listed companies are doing. Now, why this particular tool is important, what it does. So essentially, it's a tool that looks at transparency levels in the disclosure of reporting. So we look at in terms of what is the information that publicly listed companies are making available to the people, to their consumers, to the regulators. And part of this reporting is focused on anti-corruption. So looking at in terms of whether there are strong governance processes, ethical guidelines in place. And I think what we are trying to do is to build a broader narrative in the country that corruption in the corporate sector is really not only bad for the companies themselves, but it affects the country country's economic situation, whether it's the foreign investments, tax revenues, regulatory compliances, or investor confidence. It has a link to everything. And one of the things that we did try to do last year was to look at it, corruption in a more broader context, precisely in a way that the Ministry of Human Rights National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights does. So if you look at the NAP, it has 8 priority areas, and some of the priority areas that we included in this assessment focuses on, which are in synergy with the NAP, are around the anti-corruption programs, gender and non-discrimination policies, human rights due diligence, and the human rights also includes child forced labor, and other key areas, transparency in government procurement, and then contracting processes, and also then looking at how these local regulations also fit into the international best practices. And here we were looking at the UNGC 10th principle that relates to the private sector. And then the methodology is very simple in terms of, so we look at, we score and rank companies in terms of the quality and the quantity of information that's publicly available. So the companies are ranked on a scale of 0 to 1, and the information wherever it's not applicable, so it's taken out from the cumulative overall average. Now, the data sources that are used every year to assess these, public listed companies, they include the company's audited reports, the company's website, any other policy documents that the companies have made publicly available, but also part of it, every year the scoring is shared with the company. So if there is any feedback on the scoring that is given to the TI Pakistan, so the scores are revised before the publication. So last particular index that we published in 2025, so if you look at the top 70 companies, and this top 70 companies, obviously they are based on the financial benchmark. And last year we did it around 25 million shares on the stock exchange. The overall index showed the transparency level at 7.23 out of 10, which we categorize as moderate transparency. There was none of the company that achieved 100% score. 26 out of the 69 companies were significantly transparent. 30 were moderately, 10 partially, and 3 were slightly transparent. And I'm going to talk in the next 2-3 minutes very quickly about some of the indicators that focuses on the topic of today's webinar around the human rights. So one of the sections that we look every year is around anti-corruption programs. And anti-corruption is one of the key priority of the National Action Plan. And if you look at this particular section, it talks about 15 to 18 broad indicators ranging from whether the companies have, public statements, commitments around anti-corruption, whether the board of governors or the highest leadership has made, publicly available statements as part of their reports, but then also looking at specific policies, the policies against gifts, hospitality, the whistleblower protection policies, whether there are grievance redressal mechanisms in place. So there is a broad range of indicators that we look at it. And the last year assessment shows that the lowest score on the track assessment was on this particular section, that the 70 public listed companies had only average score of 47.28%. There were 50 companies which had explicit anti-corruption statements. There were 29 companies out of 70 which had leadership endorsing anti-corruption efforts in form of their statements coming out of CEO or chairmen. 47 companies confirmed their code of conduct applies both to employees and to the board of governors. Only 10 companies disclose that they have a publicly available policy against prohibiting facilitation payments. Similarly, we looked at a number of other areas, gifts, hospitalities. Only 36 companies had publicly available policies on these areas. On whistleblowing, we saw only 41 companies had whistleblower policies in place, which apply on two-way, confidentiality of the whistleblowers as well. Now, I think the one important point that I want to make here is that when we say, these scoring, this in no way saying that these policies are not in place. The track assessment only looks at what is publicly available. So even if the score is low, it does not mean that the company does not have that policy internally available. It's just that it's not publicly available. The second important area that the assessment looks at, again in line with the key priority of the NAP, is reporting on gender and non-discrimination. Again, last year we had an average score of 68.84% on this particular section, and it looks at number of things again. how much commitment on gender non-discrimination, on equal wages, on equity are in places. And we saw again on each indicator there are separate assessment levels. So, for example, 58 companies committed to protecting women from workplace harassments. 27 companies reported having gender inclusive promotion policies, and there are other indicators with different scoring levels. We also saw procurement transparency. Again, this was another area which was weak in a way that there were only few companies which engage with the public sector when it comes to contracting, but we saw that wide form of public sector organizations were also not applicable on this particular section. But the average score was 58.89% on this. There were only two companies which achieved full transparency, OGDCL and System Limited. Some companies had their bidding documents, evaluation reports, their contracting financial information publicly available as well. Then there's a section on the human rights due diligence and the corporate social responsibility. Again, if you look at the average score on this was merely 60.4%, and there are a lot of gaps areas within this human rights that largely draws its indicators from the National Action Plan that were also identified. Sector-wise comparison, we also given, we saw that, the highest transparency levels were within the chemical sector at 94.79. There were other sectors which both the highest and low level of compliances. But just to make some quick, input on your question around the gaps. So what we identified from this overall assessment, and I'm talking about this based on the last year audit reports. We are in the process of publishing this year's report as well, somewhere in April. But what we felt is there is a need for improving when it comes to the regular review of the anti-corruption programs or training and having these policies publicly available. We also saw that there is a gap in terms of when it comes to code of conduct, whether it's being applied to the intermediaries, third parties, which are acting on behalf of the companies. On the human rights, we also saw that there are gaps, when it comes to promotion policies being explicitly communicated that it ensures workplace equity as part of its disclosure practices. There's a need for publishing bidding policies, tendering processes, post-contract award for government contracts, and overall, I think within the human rights space, the driven mechanisms on child and forced labor policies, these also need to be more reported as part of the reporting. So maybe I'll end here and we'll look forward to continuing conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kash Saab. I think a very a good holistic overview of the entire survey that is going on into this particular area. I'm just going to move on now and just building up on the narrative. I'm going to move on to you, Khola. So because we're talking about the microeconomics, we're looking at the Pakistan picture, and then we'll go on to the global picture as well. So I want to understand that over and over again, it has always been a discussion that the regulator, the SECP, the Pakistan Stock Exchange, they need to come on board and also, try to integrate mandatory human rights disclosure. So in terms of that, what do you think has been or what has been some of the initiatives that the Ministry of HR has taken in this particular area? And what could be some of the potential incentives or you could say the disincentives for businesses to start disclosing on the human rights disclosures?
Thank you, Noor. So starting with the government's initiative, which is National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. We have been implementing this action plan since 2020. And this is, in fact, last year of its implementation, and then we'll be moving forward to the second phase of the SNAP DHR. So it is very important when we talk about mandatory procedures that we have to understand that what is the real situation going on in Pakistan, so that if there are not any mandatory requirements in place, then we have to first assess that why is it not happening? So the thing is that when we were drafting this national action plan, we realized that there are plenty of and plethora of laws and regulatory mechanisms, but there are issues of implementation. Also, we understood that there is a lack of awareness raising. Awareness on these, there is more need for awareness raising on these issues with the companies and also the government functionaries working on the business related human rights abuses. So keeping in view all these issues, and also there is lack of research as well, we drafted this national action plan, and we didn't exactly put in many mandatory requirements in this action plan, but rather we focused on implementation of existing laws and then taking those baby steps and moving towards, tangible requirements. So I'm very, I mean, the statistics which Kashif has shared are sort of, I take them as positive small steps. And then, of course, it's a very small sample, which is like 70 listed companies. But then that is our first step. I would say that which government is also viewing it as its success. And building on this sort of information, we understood that large companies and also which are taking benefit from GSP Plus schemes, they are already implementing these human rights due diligence related requirements. But the problem is mainly with the small scale industries, and also there is a problem of financial. Of course, there are financial constraints as well. So keeping in view all these, challenges into our mind, we started with legislation for eliminating, for instance, child labor. So now we know that there is Punjab Labour Code as well, which is very comprehensive. And then we also had other sort of legislation, for instance, elimination of child marriage. And then these legislations, and also there is an amendment in that pledging of child labor, for instance. So all these sort of amendments, they sort of complemented our existing legislations. And then for the implementation, we had been in touch with the provincial governments because the subject of labor has been devolved after 18th Constitution Amendment. So we created these provincial committees for implementation of NAP-BHR. So what it did, it included all the state functionaries, and they regularly need to assess that these amendments and also the existing laws, what are the gaps? Are they being truly implemented or not? So there is regular check and balance, I would say, by including law enforcement personnel as well and other stakeholders. And then we have been creating awareness raising through these sessions. And also we are going to provinces regularly in partnership with UNDP Pakistan, which has been helping out Ministry of Human Rights since the beginning for implementation of this action plan. So and also we have been carrying out research. So what we, through this research, awareness raising, legislative and policy reforms, what we have achieved, that we have created a human rights due diligence checklist and a very comprehensive human rights due diligence framework. So there is one framework for the state entities, and then there is a due diligence checklist for the business entities. So we have been targeting both simultaneously to achieve, that human rights due diligence framework is sort of informally first incorporated into the domestic sector. And then once there is acceptance, we can move towards mandatory requirements. SCCP is part of the National Implementation Committee of this National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. And also there are the regulators and FPCCI and other private stakeholders as well, along with the government functionaries. So I would say that with coordination and with these steps, we are moving towards ensuring that human rights due diligence becomes part of Pakistan's normative framework. Yeah, that is pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khala. And this raises a really interesting question in my head, and I'm going to pose it to the audience as well. We have close to 45 people on the call right now. So let's do a little bit poll right here. And this is in addition to, the statistics, Kashif, that you have shared with us. Let's just ask everybody who's on the call. I see a lot of compliance and regulatory and legal managers here as well, and heads as well. How many of us have seen the HR due diligence framework? Just type in the chat yes or no. Remember, saying no actually shows that you are really, really brave, because that leaves room for learning something new and just going through something which is good. So just this is a question for all the audience that we have on the call right now. How many of us have seen the HR due diligence framework from the Ministry of HR that Paula was just speaking about? Brigadier Khurram Saab, well done. You're the bravest person in the room today. No, very good. We have another no coming in from Imran. I'll wait for more no's and yeses coming in from the audience as well, because these are the kind of issues, and this is why we keep repeating at ESG Nexus that these are the conversations that need picking up. And speakers, please do have your chat functions open in front of you. And Khola, this is some food for thought for us as well, that we have to see that these conversations are so important. While we're getting the responses from the audience, I'm still waiting for a yes. I haven't seen a yes right now. But that brings me to you, Rabia, because ILO has been around in the country for decades, and it has been working largely for protection, not only for labor laws, but also I know in terms of the whole 360, the whole, you could say the spectrum of labor laws that need to be done, whether it's child labor, whether it's modern day slavery, whether it's looking at ways in which labor unions are working. Let's talk about the ease. And then the first point to start off with, when companies are thinking about integrating these decent work principles into their sustainability reporting practices, how can companies and organizations do it in a measurable way? And what is some of the things that you can share from ILO's perspective as to where should all of these compliance managers and ESG managers and legal heads, where should they reach out?
Thank you very much, Noor. Thank you to ESG Nexus. Wonderful facilitation and great hearing, Ministry also on how they're taking forward the NAPPHR. Now, from an ILO's perspective, I think what we propagate is that, embedding decent work into your core sort of strategy would require this one fundamental shift. It's stop treating labor standards as a constraint and, sort of start treating them as operating infrastructure. That's if you get that right, success is waiting for you. And many companies, they say they support decent work, but their purchasing models, the cost structures, the incentive systems, they are telling a different story. So if your procurement is, essentially, directing towards price reduction or the subcontracting is unchecked, that no amount of auditing is going to ensure that sustainable labor outcomes are also achieved. So we need to move beyond, just compliance and then understand what that really means. And for ILO, this is actually aligning your commercial strategy with your labor sort of outcomes or expectations. One, responsible purchasing practices have to match the labor commitments. Wage discussions, for instance, have to be linked with productivity and pricing decisions. We know wage setting mechanisms are weak. Collective bargaining is very limited. And this is essentially because there is a disparity within the public domain and the private function, which does not speak to each other. So there's a need for more robust social dialogue to come together and bring these entities. Now, climate strategies also need to include workforce transition planning, and this is something that we are seeing more of now as companies are trying to unpack what just transition means. Very recently, we helped NAFTTC, the National Vocational Technical Training Commission, carry out the skills anticipation survey, and it was for the very first time that we included a green component on skills anticipation to the survey, which points out to the fact that very limited number of enterprises, and that too at the sort of higher tier where they're close to brands and international buyers, they know the kind of workforce planning they need or human resources they need, especially with regards to green transitions. Others, not so sure. So human capital development, cannot be left as CSR. It has to be a strategic investment. It has to be a decision taken at the board. Again, workers' voice. I talked about social dialogue. This has to viewed as risk intelligence. Workers' representation has to be embedded in the boards at the level where strategic decisions are taken. Now, you asked me about ILO's specific role. We are not an auditing body. We are not a branding partner. But we do provide normative clarity in terms of what are the labor standards asking, and the structural sort of challenges of how supply chains are organized versus what is decent work really asking for. Now, decent work asks for stability, it asks for voice, it asks for distribution of income fairly across supply chain, and we have seen that even in progressive economies. In the highest tiers of supply chain, the violation of human rights or labor rights is happening just in different forms. So, you might be getting minimum wages as per the law, but, you're still in that working poverty, which is not necessarily helping, workers or impacting their lives positively. So we also help with practical guidance through the what we call MNE declaration. And we have, together with our constituents and social partners, Employees Federation of Pakistan and Pakistan United Workers Federation, we're trying to reach out, create momentum within industry associations, sectoral associations for what are these MNE, what is this MNE declaration telling you? Again, evidence, from our field experience, from our factory-facing projects like the ILO flagship project, the Better Work Program, shows that improved working conditions, correlate with improved productivity and performance. Again, I'll underscore the importance of social dialogue and its importance to reduce, this trust deficit between public and private sector. And of course, within this, an integrated outlook to jobs, social protection, skills development, just transitions. This is very important. So I would say companies need to, look at supply chain stability, resilience, and quality, and directly see, how working conditions relate to these. I think that should be, in a summary, the answer to your question.
No, thank you so much, Rabia. And that also has brought up a very interesting point, and I'll connect it to what Kashif was saying earlier in terms of, yes, there has to be a management commitment, but then how are we actually translating it into actual tangible results in terms of looking at the entire supply chain? By the way, Hola, if you can approve that, I found the correct link to the Business and Human Rights Guidelines. I've shared it in the chat box with everyone, just to see that this is a resource that's available, 132 pages. Quick Google search, it gives you a framework, it gives you actually a starting point, way to start off from. So do take a look at that as well. And if we can get a thumbs up from Hola that yes, we are on the right track on it, and I haven't shared an incorrect resource with the audience, that will be greatly appreciated. Now, bringing what Rabia, what you were talking about in terms of the entire supply chain mechanism, efficient procurement, resourcing of individuals from the get-go, making sure that you are informed, making decisions that are informed, and then looking at the entire value-driven supply chain that we're speaking about. Fernanda, this brings me to you as well, because I did notice a mention in the guideline document as well that the UN working group has worked aggressively on, establishing these communications, and ensuring that there is implementation at the grassroots level, especially in Pakistan. Let's talk about, from your experience, Fernanda, what are some of the steps that you feel that people or businesses from emerging markets can take, the practical steps that they can take, starting off on, just working towards implementing these simple human rights into the business ethics or their actually policy level documents?
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you. So I think the first thing that businesses should do and could do that it's very easy and at hand is to raise awareness and get the capacities built up. So participating in this sort of seminars or webinars and engaging with different institutions and organizations that can support their knowledge building. So this year marks the 15th anniversary of the Business and Human Rights, of the United Nations Business and Human Rights Guiding Principles. And it is a good moment for many businesses and stakeholders around the world to really take advantage of this moment and the momentum and push for more implementation. The guiding principles clearly call for the businesses under the pillar 2. So the guiding principles are structured in 3 pillars: the obligations of the state, the responsibilities of the business, and access to remedy. And so with regards to the responsibilities of the business, they call for incorporating, first of all, a human rights policy in the businesses, in the structure of the business. So this would be step 1, raising awareness, being in touch with these institutions, understanding these different standards, including, of course, the labor standards, as Rabia was bringing to the table. And then working on structuring, even if it's a simple human rights policy, that would be the step 1 that shows that the business, the company has the commitment to work towards integrating a human rights lens into their operations. Of course, human rights due diligence as a tool is a very important tool that companies can take up to identify potential human rights risks in their operations and the value chain. This can be from child labor, as the colleague from the ministry was mentioning, to different human rights, labor rights, issues, to things more related to the environment, to discrimination, to different impacts that the companies can have depending on the sector, on the size, on the type of operations. I would say, so that's the first type of human rights due diligence, is that identification of those potential risks. Then companies should deploy different prevention and mitigation measures, which of course need to have a focus on the people, so people at the center. But of course, it also creates value for the company, because if you prevent any harm, any potential, let's say, conflict with the community, or you prevent even legal complaints from your workers, from your consumers, from the community you operate in, that it's also good for the business. And I really want to stress this because I wouldn't want businesses to see this as an additional requirement to them. I know there is a lot of pressure on businesses, legal requirements from the market. If they are suppliers of, let's say, international companies, they need to prove all these things. But I wouldn't want it to be seen as a burden. And I think this is a very important point, because preventing human rights risks, again, prevents risks for the people, but also for the business, right? And so it's another way of looking at business operations and the business model. And I think this is the innovation that the guiding principles brought 15 years ago, but it's also something that, let's say, UN agencies have been working for decades, and also other agencies, sister agencies like the OECD, for example, through their guidelines for multinational companies that also turned 50 this year. So the guiding principles turned 15 and the OECD guidelines turned 50. And then, of course, we have all the ILO conventions, etc. So the international trend is towards incorporating human rights due diligence. In some countries, this is being done through mandatory human rights due diligence, so different legal frameworks, as in Europe, for example. Just yesterday or the day before, the new human rights due diligence directive was approved at the European level. We had expected something stronger. It was merged a little bit with other directives in this, what it's called the omnibus proposal, but it still has strong requirements for big companies and their suppliers. So if any, for example, of the companies in this call are part of the supply chain of a European big company, or a subsidiary or somewhat related, connected through commercial ties, then they are required to comply with this human rights due diligence. So this is the trend also, and I think it's interesting to understand that Pakistan also has a human rights due diligence framework and checklist, because I think that's an important step forward for Pakistani companies or companies operating in the context of Pakistan that can move things forward. And that is the trend. Even if we're seeing some, let's say, instability or volatility in the international arena, I would say, I think it's important to really stress that this is a trend. This is good for people, good for businesses, and good for the country, of course. And so I guess the call is for businesses to really take this up and take the first steps. And eventually they'll get to the next and to the next. It's a process, right? But you have to start somewhere. So I guess that's the most important message I wanted to share, and I'm here at your disposal for more discussion. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, Fernanda. And I think that's really reassuring also what you're saying, that, you know, it is the first step. And even if it starts off with a simple human rights policy, that is where we actually start off in building up the narrative. I'm going to come back to you, Kashif, because one thing that is really stuck, and I do have a series of questions, but I'm going to go on and focus on what you had shared with us in terms of the Pakistani companies who have actually, you know, reported on these disclosures, and they have 100% success, 100% disclosure in terms of their procurement practices. So I picked up 2, OGDCL and Systems Limited. So just building up a narrative, and just for a question for all of the audience who are here on the call with us, it's a mix of different organizations, public sector, private sector, some may be SMEs as well, some complete FMCG sectors as well who are here. What would be some of the driving forces for a company like, let's say, Systems Limited to actually report on these disclosures? What do you think would be some of the incentives? Let's talk about the brightest picture first, and speak about what is it that they would be looking at in terms of, let's say, profitability. Let's look at, you know, securing a more businesses abroad, just like Rabia was saying, and Fernanda was mentioning also that it presents a very good case when you are in the export space as well. What is it that actually drives those conversations, and what is it that we can take as I would say inspiration from such companies for all the people who are here on the call today?
No, thank you. I think for me, is the value. If the company sees the value in these things, they report on this, because essentially, if you're talking about the incentives, the incentives are very much linked to the regulatory landscape of any country. Now, one of the issues in our regulatory framework at the moment is that most of the things that we have talked about today, from a compliance and from regulatory point of view, they are a voluntary compliance. They are not the mandatory compliance. So the businesses and human rights reporting, because it largely comes as a voluntary compliance, this means that businesses have to see an incentive or a value of doing it. So one value of showing them that if you do a better reporting on anti-corruption, it prevents the cost that comes with the scandals. It prevents the cost that comes with the integrity crisis. But I think so that's one sort of a normative part of it. But I think the more one could say a stronger part of it would be the regulatory side of it. And I think there one of the things that we are trying to do with our engagement with the regulator is to highlight that there is also a need for the regulatory reforms to create this consistency, standardization with the human right reporting requirements to be integrated within our local corporate governance frameworks, whether it comes from the SSCP, the PSX, the SPP, we need to move away from this voluntary narrative into the mandatory requirement. And that also the mandatory requirement then has its own risk that the company sees because then it becomes the mandatory part of reporting. Secondly, I think the other important area from the incentive point of view is something that earlier speakers have also highlighted is around the awareness. And I think there is also a very strong need for creating an awareness within the corporate sector because एक चीज बड़ी clear है कि जब हम ये ESG environment social governance indicators की बात करते हैं so there is a change at the global level including the human rights due diligence. So we now see that these requirements now are becoming increasingly prerequisites, whether, if you look at it in a more macroeconomic context, whether these are foreign investments, access to markets, or participation in global supply chains, these are now the requirements of the global landscape as well. And think about it. I mean, if you're a company that is export oriented, you can't really have a market access without having these all human rights due diligence requirements that we are talking about, because these are now largely linked with the trade preferences under the GSP frameworks and other frameworks. So what I think from the awareness point of view, there is also a need to emphasize that it's not really a compliance issue. It's also an issue of economic competitiveness, and it's also an issue of the market access. And there is an incentive and a value that we can propose to the companies. And thirdly, I think again linked with the incentives and the regulatory reforms is the issue of capacity building. And I think there is a clear need for capacity building here. One of the issue again from the regulator point of view, if you are a company, we often hear it from the businesses कि जब हम compliance की ज़्यादा बात करते हैं तो compliance, always new compliance comes with a cost. And we see this, with the increasing now ESG requirements. This means that the companies have to spend a lot of money now on the hiring of consultants to do these reportings. Now, often I think within this tendency, what ends up is that maybe we are missing the point. We are treating this reporting requirement as a tick box, and there I think comes the role of the regulator. That how do we reduce this burden on the companies by maybe engaging the companies with more clearly with more clear reporting templates, with more guidance. Maybe engaging the higher level senior management or the people who are involved in the company's reporting, such as company secretaries, in terms of what are the requirements, what templates can be used. And this would, I think, not only ensure better compliance, but also reduce the unnecessary cost, which is often a concern for the businesses whenever, the new requirements that we talk about. So these are the 3 points that I think from our experience, to me, it seems would be important moving forward.
Well said, Kashif Saab. I think that for all the audience who are in the group, there's a plethora of resources also that are coming up. And just picking up on these 3 points in terms of incentives, I think training, what you're mentioning, is really, really up there, because that actually provides the starting point for any organization to start reporting on it. I think over the years, we've also seen that conversations around board tables have also switched from directors training, going from simple financial disclosures to more IFS related disclosures, to what scope 1, 2, 3 disclosures are going to look like. And that's essentially what we're all here talking about, the scope 3 disclosures. Right? We're talking about supply chain. We're looking at the complete life cycle of any organization who's going through developing their products and services, and looking at ways in which they could have more tangible outcomes coming out from it. Rabia, I'm going to move down to this because you've shared a resource which I think is so prevalent in terms of that starting point that Kashif and Fernanda were speaking about as well. What does the ILO help desk actually facilitate? So does it help in identifying or letting organizations identify a way forward? Where should we start off from? And what are some of the key low-hanging fruit that organizations can pick?
Thank you very much, Noor, again. So yeah, I mean, I've shared this resource. This actually helps translate what is there in the M&E declaration. As you say, also, they can reach out to get clarity on what the labor standards are saying. It's really sort of, unpacking, simplifying what due diligence in terms of labor rights and labor standards means. What are the fundamental principles and rights at work? How do you ensure that supply chains, are operating free of child labor? Clarity in terms of what is, permissible age to work. Let's say, on child labor, for instance, if you want to dig deeper in terms of what is the flexibility closure for, developing countries. Then it also gives you self-assessment checklists and tools to sort of gauge whether your enterprise is at par or, has standards that are aligned with the principles in the M&E declaration. So really sort of, unpacking labor rights, labor standards particularly, and how they can be applied throughout the supply chain. You can also, if you have more sort of tailored expectations that you want from the help desk, I think you can also reach out to the ILO and ask them more specific questions. So it's really free of cost until you can get your answers from the help desk. But if you want more sort of hands-on training resources that you can then adapt to your particular environment, ILO also provides expertise, especially through the help desk.
Wonderful. So it's essentially a starting point, and let's again engage the audience and ask that, how many of the people who are on the call today, they've been lost in terms of doing their research and not knowing where to start off from. So you can go in with a me, or you can say that no, we have found something already on this. So just before the call today, if the audience can just answer this question for me, that were you also skeptical about where do we find the resource? And you can just write in me, and then we can see how many me's do we get in the chat box. So this is for all of the audience who are here. If you were skeptical about where do we find the resource before this webinar, please do chime in into the chat box, and we'll have more conversations. Usman Sam, I'm definitely not leaving you out, but I'm going to come around to you towards the end of the session, and we'll open the forum for questions as well. But Hola, you spoke about in terms of the next round. Now the Ministry of HR is going to work on the level in terms of what is going to be the next phase. What does it look like? So just your thoughts on where do you think the next direction of the Ministry of Human Rights is going to be, and what does it entail for the organizations in Pakistan?
So first of all, I want to mention that the BHR guidelines which you have shared in the chat box, these are precisely the sort of framework which we have used to and narrowed it down to develop the checklist and the humanist due diligence framework, which unfortunately I couldn't share here today, but maybe I can share it later with Kasha Saab, and then the members, then all the participants could have it later. And also, when you talk about the next phase of NAP-BHR, I think there are certain areas which we sort of didn't link up in the first NAP-BHR, which we are considering to be part of the next phase. For instance, climate change, the nexus between climate change and human rights, as it is very much affecting Pakistan, and of course, the business activities and their influence on community. There need to be more precisely explained in the next phase of NAP-BHR. So that is what we have been doing in our checklist and humanist due diligence framework that promote. We have been asking companies as well as state entities to give preference to businesses. For instance, businesses that which are promoting community-based services, they can be given more incentives, and also we'll keep on doing our existing work, because we still think that awareness raising is insufficient at the moment. and more businesses need to be taken on board. And because we are a state organization, we usually start with state-owned entities that they need to be aware responsibilities. It does not mean that we are excluding the private sector, but that's how the government approaches. And usually it also helps on reporting on human rights treaties, which have been ratified by Pakistan. Implementation of International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights is very much important in this regard. So that is how we are approaching it. And we are taking, as Fernanda said, that we have to take small steps first, and then gradually when the momentum is kind of, it has been sort of built up, then we can achieve greater results as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Hola. And I think I've put it in the chat box as well that we can take some questions from the audience as well. So if anybody has any questions, or even if the live audience have any questions, feel free to ask. You can do so in the chat box as well. Type it out, and we'll get the panelists to speak about that. With that, I'm going to move on to Usman, you, and just talking about just looking at it from the SME point of view. So a lot of we're going to get a lot of slack in terms of, all right, the inflation in the country is really high, the GDP is not that great. There are a lot of SMEs that are working with limited resources. And for that, what is essentially a realistic a roadmap that they can use to improve their human rights reporting capabilities? What is it that they can do in terms of where should they start off from, and what should be some of the practical steps?
Thank you, Noor, and thank you for all the participants for their valuable input. So in relation to the SMEs, Noor, you and I have done a number of webinars previously, and my key focus point is that starting point, which is capacity building. Okay, so if we look at the our speakers who have raised those, so Fola mentioned a term like raising awareness. Rabia mentioned about taking baby steps. Kashif Saab mentioned about capacity building. Fernanda said about raising the bar in terms of awareness. So the first question that we need to ask is, you can do another public poll now and ask people in terms of National Action Plan. I'm sure 90% of the participants would relate National Action Plan to terrorism. Okay, because in 2014, when that National Action Plan came out, it was heavily linked to anti-terrorism and so on and so forth. A number of people in Pakistan, would not know what that National Action Plan further relates to when there was an amendment that came out in 2021. Then let's talk about HR due diligence. You've conducted a poll. The writing is on the wall that a number of people, are not aware of that HRDD, and there are so many resources available, not just online, but in Pakistan to help with this. But the question still remains, what is the capacity building, the awareness, and the implementation of such activities that we are doing? So I'm a great fan of Transparency International Pakistan. When they publish reports, those reports are not huge narrations of stories and so on and so forth. They have got tangible results of what that report is particularly about, and that is what Kashif Saab explained earlier on in relation to where we are at in terms of HR implementation. Fernanda explained in where we are at in terms of HR implementation. So the first thing that needs to happen is the dissection of that National Action Plan, the dissection of that National Action Plan, not just limited to larger corporations. Okay, it needs to be cascaded down to SMEs as well. So I can give you a number of examples without naming names. There are large corporations trading in Pakistan. They are big exporters in Pakistan. They are not operating in the Pakistani sector. Okay, so they are not doing any business within Pakistan. They're doing everything outside. Okay, now whatever is happening, I'm talking about these SME organizations. They are implementing, I am in contact with them through the, ESG related work. When I speak to them on the HR and scope 3 and so on and so forth, they treat that as a tick box exercise because, their importer or their client in US or UK or Germany or Finland, wherever they are, they expect them to comply with those HR credentials or pay slips and so on and so forth kind of situation. And that is why they have to do it. And they just make it up that they are implementing. Apart from the larger corporations, there is a real lack of implementation of whether this national action plan you talk about, whether, you talk about this due diligence, HR due diligence, and so on and so forth. There needs to be capacity building. There needs to be an element of implementation. And one of the simplest ways that, if you're registering a company with SCCP, you have to have a registration with your local Chamber of Commerce. Why can't we link that look, we link your HR related policies or whatever you're doing with that? Because unless there is a forceful implementation of HR policies and procedures, that SATE, that individual, that businessman will never ever implement HR policies. I mean, we are sitting in different parts of the world and different parts of Pakistan. I know where Kashif Saab's office is in Karachi. He needs to walk down his office, go further down, maybe 2 streets down in phase 2 extension, DHA Karachi. There is a huge number of child labor working in workshops as we speak now. I mean, there's no rocket science about it. It's not hidden. If we go in our own households, 90% of our households has that choti ladki or chota ladka who is washing dishes or who is doing dusting or whatever and all that kind of business, because there's no implementation. We know that, if it's an SME, if it is a smaller business or a one-man band, there is no repercussions. I'll give you a small example, and I'll close my comment on that. I'll give you an example of registering a company in UAE. It has 7 steps, okay? And on the 5th step, you have to show HR due diligence. Now, what is that HR due diligence? That HR due diligence comprises of 3 things. You need to buy insurance, health insurance for that particular individual that you're hiring. Okay, you need to submit that insurance package on the MOHRE, as it calls, Ministry of Human Resources. Okay, then the second thing that you need to do is WPP. Okay, which is basically you will make sure that every single individual that is on your payroll is going to be paid through the payroll system with the deduction of gratuity, your basic salary, your health insurance and transport and whatever not. Okay. And the third thing, I'm talking about the unskilled labor. Forget about the skilled labor. Okay. So the unskilled people, we have to show due diligence in relation to are you providing accommodation or food or transport or whatever? Until these 3 elements are not completed on those 5, on the 5th step, you will never ever be able to register your business in UAE. Now, this is where the implementation kicks in. In Pakistan, we are fostering all these issues ourselves. We can implement all this. I mean, look at SCCP in relation to ESG now. It is happening, because they are pushing for listed companies. They're pushing for larger entities. There is awareness. I mean, we've conducted so many webinars and conferences with Transparency International. We've conducted, Noor, you have moderated yourself, so many webinars because it is happening. So this whole thing about HR can come outside the larger, sort of framework in terms of larger corporations. to smaller corporations, to smaller companies, and so on and so forth. I mean, organization of pay slips, payment of taxes, and so on and so forth. I mean, this whole culture about, I'll pay you cash, so that I can evade paying tax. Your salary is going to be 200,000 rupees, but I'll give you a contract for 50,000 rupees, so that the other, 150 I'll pay you. All this needs to stop. And that is only going to stop if there is hardcore implementation. And, in Pakistan, we have been able to prove that, if we are focused as a country, as a nation, as government, things do happen, but obviously there is a whole host of issues surrounding all these implementations and so on and so forth, that it gets on the back burner. So, just sort of, again, summarizing what I've just said, it can be a 4-stage, key implementation side that we can work on. Firstly, you identify the policies and identify key risks relevant to the business. That is what we need to do. Second thing is, it needs to be data tracking. I mean, we have Paula from the ministry. I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of how the ministry is tracking any of the data produced, or even if the ministry has any data in relation to all these larger corporations or SMEs. But I mean, we should be able to publish that data as to what that HR compliance looks like in the businesses on larger scale, on smaller scale SMEs, and so on and so forth. Then, in terms of gradually moving towards the framework like SCCP guidance, or, the HR due diligence, and obviously we know that we have a biggest, sort of UNGP framework to hand that we can work on. So all those elements are there available, resources are available to us. I mean, Rabia mentioned about ILO, help desk, and so on and so forth. All of this is available, but it all comes down to one, implementation, and two, whether that state or that businessman or that one-man band is going to be open to that change. So that is what it boils down to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Usman. And I think very rightly picked up that identifying policies, tracking the data, and then putting it into implementation. I think I've picked up one more thing as well. And thank you, Hamid Sarfaraz, for your comment as well. And this is a very, to be honest, as much as we would like to, create a very rosy picture around it. Let's cut to the chase. And Fernanda, I'm coming around to you on this because I'm pretty sure that in your working group you would have had conversations, discussions around this. Is it a checkbox activity? Is it an additional pressure on the finance team? Is it an additional pressure? Yes, the management commitment is there, but the question then is, who is going to do this job? We do know for a fact that audit organizations, the big four firms, they take it as more business. So they tend to invest into their resources, into their experts, into their partner capacity building, where they identify that yes, organization will struggle with it. Let us quickly go in, get an expert on board and provide them that guidance. But this is something which Hamid has rightly picked up, that the picture on the other side is who is going to do this job, right? And where are we going to find the additional resources? And whether in the end, is it going to be worth all the effort that any organization goes through? What is the general consensus in the working groups? And have we had any success stories from across the globe where you have seen organizations who have perhaps avoided or really you could say that, they've dodged a bullet in terms of, because they had these human rights frameworks in place, they were able to dodge, let's say a legal complication, or let's say a huge corruption case, and they've avoided it?
Thank you. That's a great question. And I think it's something we look at the working group level a lot. We see, of course, a big difference between, this large international companies that can and are investing more, and have been pioneering, let's say, this human rights due diligence and other policies. They have the capacity to invest also more. They have more resources available, let's say. And that is always positive in terms of, even having some of the big international companies have human rights departments, for example, or teams, let's say. I don't know if a full department, but a team, which is something rather new, let's say, that has happened in the last decade. Some others include these efforts into their sustainability areas, some others into the compliance area, which I'm not a super fan of, if I may be honest, because I wouldn't encourage it just to be like a compliance effort, let's say, in the cases where they need to comply with a certain legal requirement. But that helps. That really pushes for some action, even if it comes from, the regulator. I think there are different drivers for companies to do these changes, and one is the regulation, of course. If the regulator, inspects you, requires it, if it's mandatory, that's for sure something that triggers change. But the other one is that it's more a business case, if you will, a market element, right? So it's good for your business. Of course, many companies have prevented, I would say, even legal demands by conducting this human rights due diligence. There are examples around the world, some others that have been involved in very difficult cases and strong, severe grievances related to human rights abuses, but acted correctly with the remedy component, ex post, let's say, now have a better reputation, access to better market shares, etc. Because they did, even if they didn't prevent, they did things right through remedy and are now implementing human rights due diligence so that doesn't happen again. So there are different examples, and I can bring many from my region, which is very far away from yours, Latin America, examples in Brazil, examples in Peru, in Colombia, and Mexico, where when companies do things right, they improve their reputation and improve their market share, and it's good for the business. And when companies do things wrong, they remain in this kind of naming and shaming list where not only civil society, but many actors don't trust the company as much. And they choose a different provider. The big brands, in terms of providers in their supply chain, they choose a different one if that happens. So I know that for SMEs, and this is something we are doing at the working group level, but also with many of our other agencies in the UN, etc. We are special procedures, so independent experts, but we look a lot at the specific challenges SMEs face, because that's a reality. And I think Osman was very clear with his intervention on some examples where you don't have much bandwidth to invest more and bring maybe one person in. I've engaged with companies in different countries around the world, SMEs that say, I don't even have, maybe I have a human resources person and that's all I have. I don't even have personnel to have someone in charge of, let's say, a human rights due diligence or even a very simple risk assessment in terms of human rights. So that is understandable. But again, there are help desks, there are other organizations supporting SMEs. And I think business associations, for example, could have a potentially good role to play here when they bring together SMEs and they can build the capacities collectively. So it's not just on one company in particular, small or medium-sized company, but it's more of a collective fashion to do it together. For example, the Chamber of Commerce of Bogota in Colombia, they have a joint grievance mechanism. So it's not just each SME has a grievance mechanism, but it's a collective one. So any worker, any consumer, any community member affected by a small business operation can bring the grievance to the trade association, let's say. So there are examples around the world of practices that can alleviate the burden for SMEs, but still bring about change. And I would encourage to explore those kinds of options.
Wonderful, Fernanda. I think that's a fantastic area. Maybe another thing that Usman and Asad we could work on is that having this, combined grievance addressal mechanism, and we could look into that as well. I am being told that we have close to 10 minutes before we have to close in. Fernanda, one thing that I also picked up that you were saying, and perhaps we need another webinar on this as well, is that when we're talking about human rights, we're actually also speaking about coming as an organization that is then preferred by good talented individuals who would want to work for you, and there's just better retention, and there is more chances of you becoming a part of something which resonates more to your belief system as well. I think if we speak exclusively for Pakistan, there have been associations, corporations who have been working. Federal Ombudsman, for once, has been working on yes, employee rights, and focusing and doing their 2 cents into what they can do to regulate that organizational rights that individuals practice. But I think that missing link is essentially where there's a concerted effort, and that's where essentially I think the ministry would play an important role. All of the people, all of you who are on the call today are going to play an important role in making sure that there's concerted effort. Like Usman was saying, 10 years ago, we were still skeptical about and on the fence about whether ESG reporting is going to ever take place and become a practice. But now we're slowly seeing that the trend is there. But remember what happened 10 years ago, and now the pace is going to be really, really advanced because of the technological advancement and just the global economics that we are seeing happen. And countries are going to increasingly more and more focus on going into initiatives that are quick wins, that are more regulated, that give you the shield, the protection first as organizations to secure their litigious requirement, their economic requirements as well. So I'm going to come around to all of the speakers since we're a little bit crushed on time. I wish we could, take this on for another hour or so. But we're going to put in 1 minute comments, all right, final comments, and then a final piece of advice, but 1 minute. And you have to see when my hand goes up, it means that the minute is over. And we'll go around the room and everybody would do like a round of their final advices to the audience that they like to give. Kashif, we'll start with you. When my hand goes up, your 1 minute is over, okay? And then we'll move on to the next person. So go.
I'll try to close in 30 seconds. I think same thing. I'll say awareness, and second, we have to engage with the regulators to ensure that whatever we are talking today is part of the regulatory requirements.
Wonderful. Moving on to Rabia, you.
Oh God. So no, I think this is fabulous. I agree with what Kashif is saying. Maybe a community of practice where, some champion employers can also handhold, provide knowledge exchange, share, tools that they might have used. We know, and I think this has been said enough, that enterprises do not follow regulatory regime out of the niceness of their hearts, but because there is a trade imperative. So, that's where we need to leverage. Thanks.
Wonderful. I think that's also really good. Usman, 1 minute.
So if we want SMEs to engage seriously with human resource due diligence, we must move from pressure to enablement. Like I said, that pressure about, doing things to enablement, clear guidance, practical tools, and phased expectation, which will achieve more than complex reporting requirements, so it needs to be tangible, achievable, and, like Rabia just said, enablement in terms of hand-holding and moving forward.
Yeah, and I think also learning on with that, with cherry picking up a couple of organizations that we could, seek inspiration from, anybody who wants to be the trailblazer. Asad, I'm going to come to you as well after Fernanda. So you also have your 1 minute suggestion that you would want to have for the group. So Fernanda, over to you.
Thank you so much. So maybe two very quick things. One is that I think we've been working for over a decade or more to change the mindset in terms of the human rights shouldn't be an externality anymore for companies. It should be internalized in their business model. I like what Osman has put in the chat. I'm not going to repeat it, but I think it's interesting to see how can the businesses, the investors incorporate that to their business model as a core, not as an add-on. That which will change the game. And the second point is something that a person told me once at an SME, which is I really would like to, for this company to be a place where I would see my daughter or son working and be happy about it. So let's think like that. Would you encourage your family member to go work in your company? If the answer is yes, you're on the right track. If the answer is no, then you need to change something immediately. Thank you.
Wonderful. I just love that. I think that's a really, when we're putting in the human element into the human rights issue, I think that is something that's really going to disrupt the market. There was one question also around the business case, Rasha Saab, you were asking. Really a personal choice of the organization. I think Osman Saab has mentioned that what kind of a brand image are you trying to portray for the organization, and is taken from that. Asad, coming around to you. Final one, 60-second comment on this particular area.
I think like everyone have given their input as per their level of intellect and the exposure and experience they have. So I think like the bottom line, which just have been discussed a while ago, like giving a family touch to the human rights. So if every one of us in our area of working, if we start thinking in this way, like the human rights or basic elements which are the foundation of every like you can say justified or equitable opportunity for everyone, where everyone can look at the growth mindset, and that is something like where we need to look at. And whatsoever we should do it in letter and spirit. So I was discussing with some legal counsel about the definition of letter and spirit, in letter and spirit. So I think so real test is like whatsoever is there in letter, it should be implemented, and at the end of the day, results should be visible to everyone by virtue of seeing at them, not even through not reports. You can see like the culture have to be nurtured. So it ultimately things trickle down to the culture of any workspace. So it's the work culture we need to promote, which is the foundation surrounded by all these legislation or action plans which we have discussed today. So I'll just
wonderful. Thank you so much, Asad. And on that note, I think we're going to close it. Hola, unfortunately, I don't see her on the call, so I think maybe she's dropped off. But thank you so much, everybody. I think this has been a really, really useful session in terms of not only sharing the insights and sharing the resources and creating more awareness, but also in terms of looking at the factual data. So thank you, Kashif, Fernanda, Rabia, Hola, Osman, and Asad for taking our time, and all of the people who were on this webinar today. I'm going to just take up what Rashid is saying in terms of the financial impact, and this is what the missing link is. Well, we have shared a lot of resources today, so maybe that should be the starting point for just looking at what is already available out there, where we can reach out, where the free resources are, where the help desk is, what is it that we can do in terms of just doing our own capacity building on our own, and then start thinking about the financial impact later on. Just first try to see if it's a tiny little disclosure that we can include as part of our sustainability reporting and as part of our annual reporting. Maybe we start off from that and then build up a narrative. There was a question above as well that, is it likely that it's going to become mandatory? Well, like we said that, it's the human rights issue has always been there in some form former place. If you go through your own organization's history as well, you're going to see that there have been in the past certain areas which you could have easily avoided if you had a grievance addressal mechanism, or if you had any other such mechanisms where people would be able to whistleblow or raise their concerns, raise their voices, and just try to address those rather than go into a litigious area. So yes, it is inevitable. Change, like we say, is inevitable, but there's a lot that organizations can do. Thank you so much, everybody. I think this has been wonderful. Please stay in touch. Those of you who have registered for the webinar, we'll pretty much make sure, and I'm taking a tall claim on behalf of ESG, that we will send you a lot of these resources that we have shared in the chat box with all of you who have registered. So you have a copy sitting in your email, and maybe you can just pop onto it one fine day. Thank you so much, everybody. Fernanda, Kashif, Rabia, Osman, and Hola for taking out time. And that's a wrap from our side. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Noor, and especially, moderating this session at such early time for you in London. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.